Welcome everyone. This is your math tutor Naresh. In this tutorial, we're going to learn quadratic factoring, factoring trinomials. So trinomial is something that has three terms. So quadratic is written in this form: ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is a trinomial because it's got three terms and it's quadratic. The reason it's quadratic is because the highest degree or the highest exponent on the variable is 2. So it's a second degree. If I make it equal to 0, then that would be an equation, but quadratics are second degree functions. So we've got x squared, x to the 1, and then the constant term. So whereas the a, the b, and the c are constants, a and b are the coefficients. So a is the coefficient of the x squared term, b is the coefficient of x to the 1 term, and c is the last term, which is constant. And actually we can write c in term with the variable x as well. So it'll be cx to the 0. So you can see how the exponent on the x descends from 2 to 1 to 0. Now, what is x to the 0? So by definition, x to the 0 is equal to 1, right? So x to the 0 is 1. Anything raised to the exponent 0 is 1. So what this then simplifies to is this: ax squared plus bx plus c, because this equals 1, so c times 1 is c. So this is just a little bit of background. So for our purposes and in your school and in your textbook, so when we write trinomials, quadratic functions, they're written in this form: ax squared plus bx plus c. So c is the constant term. Okay. So now we're going to learn how to factor trinomials. Okay, so I'm just going to write this at the top: ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is the format of the quadratic trinomial: x squared term, x term, and then the constant. A is the coefficient of the x squared term, b is the coefficient of the x term, and c is the last term. So I'm going to do 4 examples where we're going to learn how to factor trinomials. So let's look at the first one. So example 1. So the question would say factor, so x squared plus 6x plus 8. So the first thing you want to recognize is that this is quadratic factoring, that it is a trinomial. It fits this format: ax squared plus bx plus c. So let's look at the coefficients. Now a, there's nothing here, so by definition 1 is always a factor, so it's the coefficient is actually 1, right? So 1 times x squared is x squared. So in this case, a equals 1, and b equals 6, right? b is the coefficient in front of the x, so, and c is our last term, the constant, which is 8. So this has nothing to do with factoring, but what you want to be, what I want to do is make you familiar with the quadratic format and how a, b, and c's, how we extract them. It'll come in handy later on when you do solving equations, or by quadratic factoring, by using the quadratic formula. So then a, b, and c's, so they will come in handy. Okay. So the one thing I want to point out here is that the factoring that we're learning is where a equals 1. So that's the type of factoring we're going to learn in this tutorial. So here a, the coefficient of the x squared term, is 1, right? So that's what we're focusing on in this tutorial, which is made up of 2 videos, this video and the next video. So alright, let's get started. So when we are given a quadratic trinomial, we always, when we factor this, we always make 2 sets of brackets, right? And so so the first term in the first bracket and the first term in the second bracket so will is factor of the x squared. So it'll be x and x. So you make two sets of brackets. X times x will give us x squared. So these are the two factors of the first term, right? And now we need to fill in the second term in each bracket. And the way we do that is we copy the last digit or the last term. The digit is 8. Okay? So now what we want to do is we want to find two numbers that multiply to give us 8, and the same two numbers, when we add them, we get the coefficient of the middle term. So I need more room, so I'm going to shift this down. So two sets of brackets, we set x and x. Okay, so copy the last digit 8. So now find two numbers that multiply to give you 8. So we want to get 8 when we multiply, and then when we add those two numbers, we want to get 6. Okay, so multiply and then add. So find two numbers or two factors of 8, right? So two numbers that multiply to give you 8, and at the same time when we add those two numbers, we get the coefficient of the middle term. So now make a list of all the factors of 8. So factors of 8 are 1 and 8. So 1 times 8 gives us 8. Now if I add 1 and 8, do I get 6? No, I don't. Okay, what if I subtract 8, take away 1? I get 7, so I don't get 6. So this combination is not going to work. Now let's find a different set of pair. So what are other factors of 8? 2 times 4, right? So 2 times 4, and is there any other? There isn't, right? The last one would be 8 times 1, which we've already looked at. So 2 times 4, 2 times 4 gives me 8, and what if I add them, 2 plus 4? 2 plus 4, when I add them, I get 6. So that's the right pair. So those are the two numbers that when I multiply 2 times 4, I get the last term, right? So I get 8. And then when I add these two, 2 plus 4, I get 6. So those are my, those are the two numbers. So, and all you do is put them in here and here. So plus 2 and plus 4. So that's the factor. So x squared plus 6x plus 8 has two factors, and they are x plus 2 and x plus 4. So that's the final answer. Now we can check our work, right? So to check our work, you would need to multiply the two factors. So when we multiply, we are going to FOIL it out, right? So something you learn in school, FOIL. So that's the first term, these are the outer terms, that's the inner terms, and these are the last terms. So what it means is you start with the first term of the first bracket, multiply with the first term of the second bracket. So these are the first terms. X times x is x squared. Then you take x, multiply with the second term of the second bracket. So those are the outer terms. That's what O is. So x times 4 is 4x. Now we're done with multiplying x with each and every term of the second bracket. Now we start with the 2. Multiply 2 with each and every term of the second bracket. So 2 times x, so that's like the inner terms, right? Inner term of this bracket, inner term of this bracket. 2 times x is 2x. And now you multiply 2 with the 4. And those are the last terms. So 2 times 4 is 8. So we multiplied it out, and now what we want to do is collect like terms. So x squared, there's only one, so copy. These two terms are alike because they're both x terms. So 4x plus 2x, so you simply add their coefficients. 4 plus 2 is 6, so that is 6x. And then copy the last term, plus 8. So is that what we started with? X squared plus 6x plus 8? Yes, that's what we started with. So by multiplying it out, we have verified, we have checked that our factors are correct. If we didn't get the same answer, or this what we were given to begin with in the question, then we would know that our factors, we made a mistake somewhere. Okay, so that is how you do trinomial factoring where a is 1. So very important that a is 1. Okay, so just to recap, when a is 1, we copy the last digit, right? So the C, copy the last digit, then find two numbers that multiply to give you that number, and then when you add those same two numbers or subtract, you should get the coefficient of the middle term. So once you find those two, then you simply make two sets of brackets. The first term will be x and x, and then the second term will be whatever two numbers that multiply to give you the last term, to add or subtract give you the middle term. Okay, so now let's look at the second example. So second example, x squared minus 9x plus 20. So that's our second example. So notice it's a trinomial, right? And it's quadratic, x squared, the x term, and then the constant term. So when we factor, we want to make two sets of brackets. So we'll have x and x in the as the first terms in both brackets, because x times x will give us x squared. Now copy the last term, which is 20. Actually, what I want to mention to you is that 20, we always actually multiply this with the coefficient of the x squared term, but that happens to be 1, which is why I have made a note here that a is 1. So what's 20 times 1? It's 20, right? So any number times 1, you get that number. That number doesn't change. So that's why for simplicity we say copy the last term, right? So the last term is 20, copy that. So we don't say multiply that with 1, because it wouldn't change, right? So, but it's good to know. It's good to know when we do the next lesson, okay, when a isn't 1. Okay, so copy the last term, 20. Now find two numbers that multiply to give you 20, and the same two number will add to give you negative 9. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 20, and when we add, we want to get negative 9. So let's start experimenting. Factors of 20, 2 times 10, right? So 2 times 10 is 20, but what about when I add them? If I add 2 plus 2, I get 12. I want negative 9. Okay, what if I subtract 2 take away 10? That'll be 8 or negative 8, so I don't get 9. So this isn't a good pair. So actually I'm not going to use times. So let's move on and find another pair. So another pair, factors of 20, okay, 4 times 5. Okay, so 4 times 5 is 20. Okay, that's good. Now, when I add them, 4 plus 5, I get 9. Okay, that's promising, but I want negative 9. So, can I make one of them negative? Okay, if I make one of them negative, that's not going to work, because negative 4 times 5 is negative 20. I want positive 20. So now, okay, what about if I make the other one negative? The 5 also, make that negative. So now, negative 4 times negative 5, okay, that gives me positive 20, so that's good. Now what about when I add these two? Negative 4 and negative 5, when I add, I do get negative 9. So that's the answer, right? So that's the pair that we were looking for. So I'm going to write here, so negative 4 and negative 5 are the two numbers that when multiplied, negative 4 times negative 5, I get positive 20. And when I add them, negative 4 and negative 5, I do get negative 9. So all you got to do now is put these numbers in here, minus 4, minus 5. So that's the answer there. So here in this example, you see that the numbers need not be positive like they were in the first example. They can both be positive, both negative, one negative, you know, so all those possibilities are there. It all depends on what the last term is and what the coefficient of the second term is, right? So that's the factor there. All right, so now let's look at example 3. So example 3, so x squared plus 6x minus 16. So again, it's quadratic, x squared term, the bx term, and the constant, right? So there it is. So when we factor quadratic trinomials, we want to make two sets of brackets, put x and x as the first term in both brackets. Now copy the last term, negative 16. So find two numbers that multiply to give you negative 16, and when we add those two numbers, we want to get 6. 6 is the coefficient of the b term, or the second term, right? So now let's look factors of 16. So factors of 16, okay, let's try 4 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16, but I want negative 16. So I have to make one of them negative. There you go. I make one of them negative, doesn't matter which one. So negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. I get that. But now if I add them, I get 0. I don't get 6, right? So this combination is not going to work. So what are other factors of 16? 2 times 8. 2 times 8. 2 times 8 is 16, but I want negative 16. So I have to make one of them negative, right? So let's try making the 8 negative. Okay, so 2 times negative 8, that will give me negative 16. That checks. Now what about when I add them, right? That's what we wanted, negative 16. When I add them, 2 and negative 8, what I will get is negative 6. So, but what do I want? I want positive 6, not negative 6, right? So what I need to do is have my sign correctly. So it looks like if I put this negative sign on the 2, it will work. So this is trial and error. So you try, you don't know which one is going to be negative, so you put negative on whichever one you think might work. So try one. If that doesn't work, right? So now we've tried this, we know it doesn't work because if we get negative 6 when we add these, but we want positive 6. So then we say, okay, let's try this way. Let's make the 2 negative, and so let's make the 2 negative and 8 positive. So what's negative 2 times 8? I get negative 16. That checks, right? Now what about when I add them? Negative 2 plus 8, that's same as 8 take away 2, and that is 6. So this combination works. So that is what works. So I'm going to come here and write negative 2 and 8, right? So double check again, negative 2 times 8 gives me negative 16. And when I add these, negative 2 plus 8, or 8 take away 2, that gives me positive 6. So now put minus 2 here and put plus 8 here, and you're done. So that's your factor there. Okay. All right, so now let's do the fourth example. So there's only 4 examples I wanted to show, but I'm doing another video, part 2 of this, where we will do practice questions. So let's look at the last example of this tutorial. So x squared minus x minus 110. So again, we're factoring this. We know it's a quadratic, x squared, the bx, and then the c term, a is 1, right? So we make 2 sets of brackets, and the first term is x in both brackets. And now let's do our thing. So copy negative 110. So we want to find two numbers that multiply to give us negative 110. And when we add those two numbers, we want to get negative 1, because b is negative 1, right? So b is the number, the coefficient in front of x. So in front of x we have negative 1. So let's find two numbers. So 11 times 10, right? So 11 times 10 is 110. So now, okay, I want negative, so one of them has to be negative. So let me try the negative on the 11. So negative 11 times 10, it gives me negative 110. Now when I add these, negative 11 and plus 10, do I get negative 1? Yes, I do, right? So negative 11 plus 10 is negative 1. So there you go, I found it. So the two numbers are negative 11 and 10. So now we stick minus 11 here and then plus 10 here. So that's the final answer. X minus 11 is one factor and x plus 10 is another factor. So I'm going to stop the tutorial here, but do tune in for part 2 where we will do more practice questions. Thank you for watching, and if you found the tutorial useful, please like or subscribe, and once again, thank you for watching.